Uh, so in order to understand language of literature as a theme and look at what we would find uh, in terms of characteristics of language that exists in literature or that is used in literature. So before that, we actually should look at what is literature, right? There are a couple of definitions that I would uh, like to put across here for your understanding, a better understanding of what literature is. So one definition says literature is written works, especially those considered of superior or lasting artistic merit. Another definition of literature is books and writings published on a particular subject. One more definition says leaflets and other printed matter used to advertise products or give advice. But if we explore or if we take the definition of literature given by uh, Encyclopedia Britannica, I think we will get a comprehensive understanding of what literature is. For example, Britannica defines literature as, and I quote, a body of written works. A body of written works. And it says the name has traditionally been applied to those imaginative works of poetry and prose distinguished by intentions of their authors and the perceived aesthetic excellence of their execution. Literature may be classified according to a variety of systems, including language, national origin, historical period, genre, and subject matter. Well, we have got a fairly comprehensive definition of what literature is. The first thing that we come to realize through the definition of Britannica is that the moment we say literature, it is printed works or written works, right? Because these are written works, right? Printed works, it would also be published. And it is uh, the name literature is traditionally applied to imaginative works, right? So there could be, dif different, forms and genres of literature, perhaps, but typically the word literature is used to imply to mean imaginative works like poetry and prose, and which also has aesthetic excellence. So these are two important characteristics that we come to know through the definition of you know Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica. But let us also take or consider different characteristics of literature. We have taken a definition of literature from uh, Encyclopedia Britannica, then there we got two important characteristics. One, it is written works. Two, it has imagination as an important feature. So we'll try to browse through some more information where we come to know what are different characteristics of literature. Okay, so one definition says it should be a written work. It should have an imagination in it, and it has aesthetic excellence. Right? This definition is more or less, you know, of Britannica. Okay. Then second characteristic is literature communicates ideas of lasting interest. And literature is different from written works like cookbooks, travel guides, how-to books, which are meant only to provide information. Now, literature is here. The interesting characteristic is literature. Everything printed, everything written is not literature. For example, travel guides are also written and printed. How-to cookbooks are also, how-to books and cookbooks are also printed and written books, but they may not be considered literature. And one more characteristic is literature is an art form that uses language to create imaginative experiences. So these are some of the important characteristics of literature that we can take into consideration. Now coming to how this word came into being, the word literature comes from Latin and originally meant the use of letters or writing. And that is why in most of the definitions, we see that they mention written works because the very word has in it as a meaning the use of letters or writing. And when it comes to types of literature, we have poetry, drama, novels, short stories, fables, fairy tales, fantasy, fiction, folklore, historical fiction, and so on and so forth. Okay, now we have had a fair enough idea of what literature is, right? Body of written works. These are some of the definitions we have already taken into consideration. Okay, and one important idea that we can take from Webster's dictionary is excellence of form or expression. So every writing is not considered as part of literature, but those which have excellence of form or expression, right? For example, things that are primarily informative, technical, scholarly, journalistic would be excluded from the rank of literature, right? When we say imaginative works of poetry and prose. But when it comes to form or expression, we have poetry as form, drama as form, right? Fiction, non-fiction, epic, sonnet, short story, blah, blah, blah. And in terms of expression, this use of language in special ways. Now, with this understanding of what literature is and what makes something as literature and not, it's good that we uh, look at the language of literature. Okay, and in that we will try to understand how literary language is similar to or different from scientific language. Okay. Literary language, when we say literary language, right, it is connotative. What does that mean? It means the meaning of the words, expressions, phrases, sentences, right, is not direct. It is basically indirect. Take example. We know that there is a name of one color called blue, right? So when you use blue in a piece of writing, in a story, in a poetry, in any other form of literature, and you say that, or you mean not the color blue, but something else. That is, blue means sad, sad feeling. So the color blue is associated with sad feeling. So in this case, we are going beyond the direct meaning of a word, or in other cases, an expression or the whole sentence or the paragraph itself. So that kind of, going beyond the direct meaning is what connotative means here. So in literary language, the language has one distinguishing feature, that is connotative, where things are said and whose literal meaning is not taken into consideration. Rather, a literary meaning is taken into consideration. And that literary becomes literary because of connotative nature. And we took one example of, blue. Blue being color is the literal meaning of it. But blue being referred to, sad feeling is the literary or indirect meaning of it. So this characteristic is called connotative. Okay. The same way, if we take up scientific language, the scientific language is, denotative. What does that mean? That means in this kind of usage of language, whatever is written, its literal meaning is taken into consideration. We took example of blue, right? So if the word blue is mentioned in a piece of, scientific writing, it means blue as a color, nothing more than that. Implied meanings, additional meanings of a word, right, is not, considered. Only literal meaning, literal meaning is, taken into consideration. So this is the literal meaning is nothing but dictionary meaning. So uh, this characteristic is called denotative feature. Okay. Now then, the question that comes to our mind is what kind of, language we use in our everyday life. Do we use literary language, or do we use, lit- scientific language? What kind of language we use in our everyday life? Hmm? Then if we pay attention to, or if we recall from our life, what kind of language we use on our day-to-day life, right? Then we have to think that the main objective of everyday language is social interaction to help people in achieving success in day-to-day transactions. Therefore, it can range from precision to imprecision, right? Emotional situations prompt people spontaneously into a kind of language they would not think of using in day-to-day or routine situations. So in everyday life, situations vary. So do the use of language, right? As Bolton rightly points out, it is not unnatural to use figurative language, and that rhetoric is often required because ordinary day-to-day language is not adequate for expressing emotions. Strong emotions bring surprisingly rhetorical language from people with no literary pretensions. So what we realize here is, the spectrum of situation is wide. In day-to-day life, we do not stick or we cannot confine ourselves to one kind of language use. It could be perfect to imperfect, from precise to imprecise, from very normal to very loaded emotional. So all these things point to the fact that our language is a mix of both literary and scientific. Or our day-to-day language, everyday language, will exhibit characteristics found in both literary language and scientific language. For example, proverbs which have become part of everyday language have more than a literary flavor, and in their implications, they are highly connotative. A quality we know is associated with literary language, but people would use it. Right? Well, la- if we pay attention to what kind of language politicians use, right? A politician, or for that matter, a salesperson, often use sugar-coated words. The language of political propaganda practices a double deception, namely exaggerating the virtues of one candidate and at the same time not only underplaying the virtues of the opposition, but even going to the extent of slinging mud on her or his personality. This is another kind of usage of language in everyday life. So if you are a politician, if you are an advertising professional, you sugarcoat words. You project as if it is sweet. It is true. Right? A salesperson would come to you saying that this is India's leading company, or India's top selling product. That may not be the truth, actual truth, but that person is sugarcoating the information in such a way that the one who is listening to him or hearing him would immediately believe in it. Okay. There is one interesting thing, I think. Normal language becomes literary language with figures of speech. Since it has come up, right? So any language, any normal language, right, becomes a literary language with figures of speech. Uh, how we should, I mean, uh, go and how we should understand this. It is through example. We talked about proverbs earlier. We talked about indirect meaning, that is connotative feature of literary language. I think those characteristics are best found in figures of speech. Figures of speech make a normal language literary, right? Uh, Let us take example of a few figures of speech. Now we know that once Shakespeare said, "The world is a stage." Is it true that world is a stage? Have you seen it? No, it is not a stage. So, on a factual point, world is not a stage. In a direct meaning of the expression, the world is a stage, it is not. But that's a way of saying. That's a way of saying. Such a way of saying, right? Especially in this case, in this expression, the world is a stage, we call it a metaphor. Looking at somebody and saying, "You're a tiger," or looking at some girl saying, "You are moon." This kind of expression where one person is compared to lion or tiger, other person is compared to moon, or somebody else is compared to something else in a direct way. So this kind of comparison of two dissimilar things. You see, a boy or a man is compared to a tiger. We know that boy and tiger are from two different species. Boy is Homo sapien, human being. A tiger is an animal, right? So these are two different things that are being compared. Compared. Now, when you say that that boy is a tiger, is he really a tiger? No, he is not. But in this kind of comparison, a different meaning is implied. Here, boy being tiger means boy being brave. In the other example, girl being moon means girl being beautiful. So this direct way of comparing two dissimilar right things, and not literal meaning of is taken into consideration. Rather, indirect, meaning is taken. So such kind of, use of language is a good example of metaphor. And metaphor is a figures of speech. Similarly, we have simile, simile, simile. Simile is very much close to metaphor. The only difference is that, even in simile, you compare two different things. The only difference between metaphor and simile is in simile, like or as is used in comparison. So that's why it becomes indirect comparison. So instead of saying the boy is a tiger, you say the boy is like a tiger. So there is an addition of like, and this like or he is as brave as tiger. So these two examples are examples of actually simile, where comparison of two different things is done, but not in a direct way, rather using like or as. Okay. Oh, this is the second kind of second figures of speech. We'll take a couple of more for our clarity, and then we'll move on to another point. Now, there is one particular figure of speech often used in social media that is called pun. Pun, pun. Okay. What is pun? Pun is basically a joke that makes a play on words. So using words the way it is arranged, the choice of words, you know, all this is used to create some kind of a joke. Let us consider one example. The tallest building in town is the library. The tallest building in the town is a library. It has thousands of stories. It has thousands of stories. Now you see here, uh, the first part, that is the tallest building in the town is the library, is a plain fact, right? Plain statement, doesn't create any kind of, curiosity, doesn't stimulate or tickle us in any way. But the other part of that, statement is it has thousands of stories. And the moment you read this and understand, a smile comes to your face. How? Now both library, which is tallest, right? Which tallest has both, kind of stories. Now here stories could mean two things. One, floor. Each floor is called each story, right? So a building with more than two floor can be called a multi-story building. But since here we talk about library, so library is a place where books are stored, and some books or many books may have different kind of stories of people, of places, right? So that is why here story can mean both the different levels, floors, or different uh, stories of person and places or things. So this one word is creating some kind of humor, joke. So in one go, when you read it, you will realize it. And as we know, jokes are not meant to be explained. Jokes are to hear and enjoy, or read and enjoy. Okay. So in explaining what fun is as a literary device or figure of this speech, I have tried to explain a joke just to show you, you know, the fun part or the joke, the element is in one single word in the entire example. Okay, and this is a popular way of usage of language, especially on social media platforms. Okay. Now, another distinguishing feature of literary language is ambiguity. Now, if you go back to the previous example in fun, you had one word which could be floor or could also mean actual stories, right? So there is a possibility or there is a ambiguity in that word. Ambiguity is nothing but the possibility of having more than one meaning in its usage. Okay, when stories is used in that example, it could mean more than one thing. It could mean floor, it could also be actual story. So this kind of uh, possibility is actually called uh, ambiguity. Right? Ambiguity is something with more than one possible meaning, right? Now here one example of ambiguity. I saw a man with telescope. What does it mean? Does it mean you have seen a person who has telescope with him, or you have seen a person using a telescope as an instrument? So this particular statement could at least mean two things. One, you have seen a person, right? And telescope is with you, which you have used to look at him. Or you have seen with your naked eyes a person who has telescope with him, right? This is what ambiguity means. Ambiguity means having more than one possible meaning. In the previous example of stories, the ambiguity was at a word level, lexical level. Now, in this example, I saw a man with telescope. Ambiguity is at structural level, syntactical level. Okay. So ambiguity could occur at any level. And considering these, one critique, William Emerson, okay, and what he did is actually uh, he is actually a remarkable critic of modern times. He elevates ambiguity to a useful tool of language. Nobody earlier realized that, all this fun, right? And and the this beauty in the language of literature comes uh, because of ambiguity. It is he who theorized it, saying that you take any example of uh, piece of literature and you find it interesting, then there would be ambiguity behind it, which means the author was dexterous, intelligent enough to use language to create ambiguity at word level or a structure level, and thereby giving us humor. Okay. So according to him, an ambiguity gives room for alternative reactions to the ironic piece of language. On metaphor, Emerson comments that while in normal circumstances, words are used for direct statement, metaphor is employed to develop or express a complex idea by a sudden perception. An ambiguity helps a statement to yield several meanings by keeping open many possibilities, unlike a direct statement, which being flat and straight may yield one or two meanings as its best. So, according to Emerson, ambiguity helps a statement to yield several meanings by keeping open many possibilities. Okay. Emerson finds in metaphor a good source of ambiguity. The more distant an ambiguity is from simple statement and logical exposition, the more poetic and literary would be the sentence that implies it. Another source of ambiguity that Emerson finds is the pun that we actually took as an example earlier. The first type of ambiguity occurs. In fact, he talks about 7 types of ambiguity, right? He finds, metaphor and pun as sources of ambiguity. Okay. The first type of ambiguity occurs when a word or a structure makes a statement effective in many ways at once. The second type occurs when 2 or more meanings add to the single meaning of the author. The third occurs when 2 ideas can be expressed in a single word. The fourth occurs when 2 contradictory statements combine to clear a complex state of mind in the author. The fifth occurs when a simile lies halfway, and an author wants to progress from one item to another. The sixth occurs when a statement doesn't seem to convey anything and the reader is left guessing. Contradictions might sometimes yield a direct meaning, according to Emerson. His example for this type of ambiguity, the sixth type of ambiguity is Sulekha was not exactly beautiful. The seventh type of ambiguity seems to be almost opposite to the sixth type of, as in these two meanings of a word tend to be opposite. This creates a situation which demonstrates that Emerson calls it as a fundamental division in the writer's mind. Yes, so we try to understand 7 different types of ambiguity, which William Emerson talks about. He especially talks about irony. Okay, what is irony? Irony is use of words to convey a meaning that is opposite of its literal meaning. For example, you have asked a good question. You have asked a good question. This is, many a times, we hear this. Some scholars, some researchers, some teachers, use these expression that is, you have asked a good question to buy some time to think and respond. But this statement is also used with the intention where the person to whom it is asked is thinking that better you shouldn't have asked it. Though you are saying it's a good question, but what you meant at heart is, why have you asked? You shouldn't have asked. It's better you have kept quiet. This kind of uh, exam. This is an example of irony. Now, when it comes to irony, there are different types of irony: verbal irony, situational irony, and uh, dramatic irony. Now, what is verbal irony? What is said is different than what is meant. So, verbal irony means using words, right, to mean something opposite of it. So, when you say good question, you say good question, but you mean you didn't like it. That's a verbal irony. Situational irony. Something happens we didn't expect to happen. For example, fire station is burned down. The irony here is the role of a fire station is to douse the fire of other places where fire has been caught. In this case, the fire station itself has caught fire, right, and it is completely burned down. So there is irony, situational irony there. Then there is a dramatic irony. This is used in literature and performative arts. Dramatic, the audience knows something characters do not. For example, the character of Hamlet in Shakespeare's play with the same name, Hamlet, character doesn't know that he has some problem, mental problem, some illness. But the audience who are watching him, or the audience, or the reader who is reading the drama, knows that Hamlet has some illness. So that kind of irony is dramatic irony. If you're interested and would like to know or read more about irony, you can refer to Cleaneth Brooks' work titled Irony as a Principle of Structure. You just remember for the fact that uh, Cleaneth Brooks says a statement without irony is as dry as dust. Right? Without irony, the statement is dry as dust. Like we say, tea without sugar. So it is tasteless. Dry statements are tasteless. So irony makes the statement, makes the story, makes whatever you are composing tasteful, flavorful, rich. Okay, we'll move on to functions of literature. So far, we were talking about language of literature. So one thing we can carry forward in terms of our understanding of this block is that it is figures of speech that makes the language of literature rich, and it is connotative meaning which makes literary language, or is a defining feature of literary language. Okay? Now we'll look at functions of literature. In the previous class, we looked at functions of language, but here we'll look at functions of literature. Now, what is the function of literature in society? What should literature do in a society? Now, teach morality. What is the important function of a literature? Why there should be a literature? And if the literature is produced, what should be its objective? What should it do to the people who are reading it? So, as per ancient and classical understanding of philosophers, of writers, right? Greek and even in Indian, ancient philosophers, they say that the literature should teach morality. Does it remind you of anything? When I say literature, the function of literature is to teach morality. If not, let me tell you two examples. Have you read the monkey and the crocodile story from Panchatantra, Jataka tales? If yes, what does those what does such a story do to us? What have we learned from those stories? Morals, morals about human existence, morals which would help us live peacefully, morals that help us live a smart life, morals that help us avoid typical pitfalls in human existence, right? So, as per ancient understanding of literature and its function or use in the society, whether it is Greek philosophers or Indian philosophers or some other philosophers in the world, right? They say that literature should be produced and literature should be consumed to better our morality, right? And that is why we see that many popular classical stories, whether it is Arabian tales, whether it is Panchatantra or Jataka tales or some other tales, right? Those are actually serving one clear purpose, that is teaching different moral morals to us, right? They are actually helping us learn some good human values. Okay, so Greek philosopher Plato, in his work Republic, right, says that a philosopher is superior to poet, whereas poet is an imitator, mimesis, which means copying, imitating. Uh, But Plato, unlike other people, says that if you are not teaching morality, then you should not be allowed to write. He has a different understanding, saying that if the literature is not helping society become better, go into right direction, then literature and those who produce literature should be banned, should be banished. He has a reason for that. No philosopher No sage, no saint would want the people to mislead. They always want the humanity, the society, to follow the right path, the path of satya, satyam, the path of truthfulness, the path of righteousness. But if literature is, doing contrary to it, then it should not be allowed. Plato says, literature uh, fuels passion. We have feelings. We are intellectual being as well as emotional beings. So reading literature, watching a performance, right, dramatic performance in a theater, if it is actually stimulating your passions, feelings, then it is not doing good. It should actually, it should have helped you control your passions rather than fueling your passions. This one reason why Plato suggested that the poets, that is nothing but uh, those who produce literature. Here, poets doesn't mean only one who is writing poetry. Uh, in the language of Plato, at that time, poet meant those who are producing literature. Okay, so he says that a poet is inferior to a philosopher, or a philosopher is superior to poet, because a philosopher guides the society, solves the societal problem, and tries to keep the masses on the right path. Whereas poet is actually fueling passions, making people more emotional. So that's why he is not superior. And a poet is imitator. Right? What does poet is doing? Poet is looking at the nature, looking at the tree, looking at something and writing about it. Right? So what he is actually doing is imitating. He is seeing something and is writing about it. Now, according to Plato, there are three different realms. One realm, right, is realm here means prapancham, dunya, right? So there is one realm where God Himself is manifest. The other realm is this where we have, we exist, right? And the third realm is, in our realm, we have, all material things around us: trees, mountains, rivers, people, animals, species, right? Air, sky, everything. So this realm is realm number two. When we look at these things, whether it's tree, animal, anything, water, right, people, we see and form an image of it in our mind. So that is the third realm, and according to Plato. So by looking at the natural world around us, this material world around us, people, right, animals, trees, and all those things, we create a picture of it in our mind, right? So that is the third realm. And now when a writer is writing something by remembering what he has seen, so what he is basically doing is, he is removing the truth thrice. The actual truth is the God, his realm, where angels, heaven, hell, whatever is there. This is the second realm. So this is a copy of the first realm. And this copy is again copied by the human being, by the poet. And there is one copy that has come into his mind. So he is again, in producing literature, in writing something, he is again making one more copy. So it is thrice removed from reality and truth. So he says poetry feeds and waters passion. Passion is not good for society. Passion must be controlled. So these are some of the reasons why, Plato suggested uh, poetry be banned. Then comes his disciple, his student, Aristotle. He produces a book called Poetics, or treatise called Poetics. In that, he agrees to one particular point of Plato. He says, Gurudeva, Guruji, my teacher, I agree to your point that a writer or a poet imitates what is there, what is what around him. So the point of mimesis or imitation is what I agree with you. But the other part where you recommend banishing poets for producing literature, that is, by doing so they fuel passion, right? And passion is not good for society. So that is something I disagree, and I have a different view to it, right? So he, in his work Poetics, defines tragedy. He talks about catharsis, that is purgation or cleansing of emotion. So unlike Plato, Aristotle says that a dramatic performance, a piece of literature, or written or performed, helps actually in cleansing our emotions. Rather than fueling passions, it acts as a medicine. It neutralizes the emotions of a person who is reading or watching the performance. And at that time, tragedy was the dominant form of literature. So that's why he uh, wrote about, uh, wrote about tragedy. Okay. So he says that root tragedy acts like a medicine to cure soul of diseases. Milton compares principle of catharsis to principle of homeopathy. Now, in the Middle Ages, one great English writer, John Milton, who gave us Paradise Lost as an epic, a famous epic in English literature, he agrees with Aristotle. He says, yes, what Aristotle is saying is right. the concept of catharsis, that is purgation or purification or cleansing of emotion, which literature does, it actually cures the soul of diseases. So Milton says catharsis works on the principle of homeopathy. What is the principle of homeopathy? The principle of homeopathy is like cures like, like cures like. For example, uh, if we catch cold, right? What we take to cure it, we take, uh, say, for example, uh, Zendu balm, right? Or any product like that. What is it? That is cold actually. Whether menthol, whether any such product will contain cold element. So cold create cures cold, right? So this is the principle of homeopathy, and Milton compares the principle of catharsis to the principle of homeopathy. And there is one more concept of defense of poetry. It is actually uh, an essay written by Sir Philip Sidney. He is actually a Renaissance writer from England who defended attacks on literature by Puritans, particularly Stephen Gosson in the school of abuse. They called poetry a dominant form of literature then. Now this, uh, a discussion of what literature does continues even in Middle Ages. So, as Milton agrees to the principle of catharsis, then there were some other writers of philosophers of Puritan's time who charged against literature, especially in that particular time, that is the time of Puritans. Poetry was the dominant form. Okay, the way tragedy was dominant at the time of Aristotle. Similarly, in times of Puritans, poetry was dominant form. And there was one particular writer and philosopher called Stephen Gosson. He called poetry as a school of abuse. And he says, producing poetry and reading poetry is a waste of time. Poetry is mother of lies. Poetry is nurse of abuse. And he says Plato rightly banished poets. So unlike John Milton, who favors Aristotle, Stephen Gosson favors Plato. He says that, oh, yes, the poets or the producers of literature must be banned because, number one, poetry is a waste of time, poetry is mother of lies, poetry is nurse of abuse, and they must be banned. Okay. So Stephen uh, Philip Sidney responds to Gosson's charge against poetry. In his essay titled An Apology for Poetry, Sir Philip Sidney upholds poetry as the highest form of art. He defends it. The way Plato said something and Aristotle agrees to one point and uh, responds to remaining, and then John Milton agreeing to Aristotle, Then comes to Stephen Gossens charging something against poetry. Then again comes uh, Sir Philip Sidney, and he is actually defending poetry. There were four different charges against poetry by Stephen Gosson. So Sidney comes and responds to those charges. He says poetry is not waste of time. It's actually a source of knowledge. Poetry is source of knowledge. Poetry is the least layer among all writers. Poet, unlike all other writers, he says poet is the least, if at all there is some lie, but among all others, poet is the least one. Poetry doesn't abuse man's wit, wit abuses poetry. So he says Plato warned men not against poetry, but it's abused by poets. For example, this point needs the further clarification. That is, literature is literature. If you're producing to teach moral, it is good. If you're producing to stimulate wrong passions and feelings, then it is wrong. So that is why Sidney says when Plato recommended banning poets, it is not poetry that he was banning, but those poets who were using it for a wrong purpose. So that's what he is saying. And he considered, that is, Sidney considers poet as the creator of a moral world. Now coming to these traditions that we have done, we'll take poetic functions quickly. Literature has a social function. A writer is influenced by society and sometimes influences it. Art mirrors life and may even shape it. Literature presents a picture of society. Literature exists independently, that is, art for art's sake, with an aim of its own. If you look at language of literature in poetry specifically, so poetry an ancient mode of communication. Poetry has been in use for a longer time. Poetry uses finer words and the language is very refined. Poetry has its own forms, epic, sonnet, ode, etc. Poetry uses rhythm, stress and stress. And poetry also uses rhyme, twinkle, twinkle, example. Okay. Similarly, if we look at poetry, the language of poetry, we find that there is foot and meter. Right? Foot is a unit of stress and unstressed syllable in a line of poetry, whereas meter is the basic rhythmic structure of a verse or lines in verse. Some examples of foot. The most used or often used foot in English is iambic pentameter. Iamb is a foot, pentameter is a meter. So mostly used in English poetry is iambic pentameter. Analysis of literal language. Okay, some devices are there, alliteration, onomatopoeia. Alliteration is the recurrence or repetition of identical consonant sounds, whereas onomatopoeia is the uh, using of the sound as it is in the poetic composition. For example, buzz, right? Fly buzz, right? Buzz is the actual sound that you know, uh, a fly makes, and then imagery, symbolism, right? Or some of the poetic or literary devices used in poetry. In fiction, you have repetition, dialogue. In prose, you have letters, speeches. Okay, I think we have covered uh, to the best of our possibilities different aspects of you know and different functions of literature, and under this topic, language of literature, I hope you understood these important points as part of language of literature theme. And if at all you have any questions or you would like to pose any queries, you can type it in the chat box, or if you are watching it live stream, you can comment on YouTube. So if you want us to take some important topic, some topic which you haven't understood, you can convey the same to us through chat, and hopefully we'll meet in the next class with another theme, another topic. Till that time, take care. Goodbye.